Hello and welcome to the latest episode of Material Matters with Grant Gibson. That's me. As those of you familiar with the show already know, in each podcast we meet a designer, maker, artist or architect who is intrinsically linked to a particular material or technique, discovering how their craft shaped their lives and careers. Today I'm in the studio of Simone ten Hompel. Now I think it's safe to say that the German-born metal artist is one of the most influential and renowned makers in the UK, taking everyday objects such as spoons and vessels and turning them into works of art. She won the Jerwood Applied Arts Prize in 2005 and had a major retrospective at Ruthin Craft Centre in 2016. Her work is in a number of public collections, including the V&A, the Crafts Council and National Museums Scotland, to name just three. Teaching has also been a vitally important part of her career, and she's been at the CAFS for the best part of 30 years. So, I am right in saying, I keep getting everybody's name wrong when I do this. I am right in saying Simone, it's not Simone.
It's a French name.
Yeah.
I was conceived in Lago Maggiore, or somewhere in Italy. Simeone, the place is called. In English it's Simone. In German it's Simone. I listen to anything that is vaguely in that
Okay,
region.
so what would you rather?
I don't mind.
Simone, let's go Simone.
Anything, because I quite like it if people bring their own sort of hinterland to the name.
Okay, fine. We'll go with Simone for this interview in that case.
Yeah.
Can we talk a little bit about the studio that we're sat in? You share it with other makers, right?
Two other makers.
Who are they?
Adi Toch and David Clark, and they're both in the field of metal, and possibly people will know their name.
I mean, did you deliberately want to share with other metalsmiths, metal artists?
This workshop goes back some years when I left the Royal College of Art and then shared with 5 others out of our year from 1989, the cockpit workshop. And then we had our fill of 3 years and a bit, and then we needed to find another workshop, and that lasted for a couple of times. And finally, Richard Wallis and Rebecca de Quinn set this workshop up here. And both now have moved on for years and years. And it made sense to have 2 other people in this space because it's big enough. We had the setup more or less. You know, all the things that are communal, you don't need to share. So they're big tools we all use, but everyone has their own bench with their own personal tools. And then we have a kitchen space and, you know, it's a good place in the summer to have a party with the gum tree open and the slight breeze. In the winter, you want to wrap up nicely.
It is slightly, I mean, it's early April when we're recording this, and it is slightly chilly in here, I have to say. I mean, just for the listeners, can we describe it a little bit? Because you have rafters, you have ladders, you have scaffolding. It's extraordinary.
It's a building that must be 100 years old, and the roof certainly has shown its years. And therefore, we have the scaffolding because 2 weeks ago, we had a major water cascading coming through from one of the roofs. We have 2 gullies in this space for some funny reason. And the wood is quite rough. And it's not insulated at all. So you possibly could heat the environment faster than this workshop because of the amount of steel we also have.
Yeah.
It holds the cold.
Yeah.
The beams, the surface plates, and all this other steel we use and have. Other than that, I think it has a charm because it's really a great open space. You can see the pitch. It has a fantastic light anytime after 3, 4 in the afternoon. In the summer, the sun sets over the canal. If you look out of the window, you get the reflection of the sun. There are a lot of good things to be said for it, apart from that it is quite cold and damp.
Because we're in the East End of London, you've got a tremendous amount of building work going on right next to you. Yeah. Presumably you must have seen a lot of changes in this area since you've been here.
Yes, a lot. When we were here, it's a bit like that children's book, The House and the City. And first it was one house and there were a couple of houses around it. And at the end you see this little dwarfed house and all these sky-rised building. And it feels a little bit, there's a bit of a park and, you know, a bit of social housing that is not but this is of a different time and an era. As soon as you come in through the yard, you can feel it. It's alternative, to say the least. It has green. Nothing is conservatively planned. Everything is haphazard, and there are lots of musicians and people who live a life that is outside the conventions, I would say. And there are good parties here, lots of music going on, so don't be surprised if anything pops up.
Well, let's. The point of the podcast is to talk about your relationship, or a maker's relationship, with material. Can we talk about your relationship with metal? Because it seemed to start very young. I mean, I read that you started experimenting with metal at the age of 6.
Yep.
Is that right?
Yeah. At least around about that time. I think one of my earliest Christmas presents that made me incredibly happy, and whenever I see bits of it now, I get quite emotional, is a toolbox, a wooden toolbox. The year before, I got push chair and a doll, and soon figured out that you can take off the wheels. And my mum was devastated. But that next year, the toolbox really, that was fantastic.
So you're saying you jacked your pushchair up, in other words? You had it on bricks?
I took it definitely off, and I had a ceremonial buriage of the doll between Christmas and New Year. And I think in the New Year, it went to the awesomeness, the whole thing, the pushchair, the doll, and everything that came with it. But the toolbox with pliers and hammer, everything tiny, but not out of plastic. A proper pair of pliers, a proper hammer with a light metal hammer and a small drill bit. Oh, fantastic,
So it sounds as if your mother was upset that you gave the pushchair away. It was your father who was encouraging the tools.
Yeah. I think my mum also, when she saw how I enjoyed that box for years and years, she understood very early on that this is, for me, the kind of toys I like. And my father possibly always wanted to have a son, and I fitted into that bracket quite nicely. And I really enjoyed those times, when you have a father who comes home and gives you time. And he didn't treat me as a kid how to show in a safe way how to handle a pair of scissors, and makes you so conscious that you think, oh my God. No, on the contrary, he showed me all the tools, including a sharp pulling knife that you pull towards yourself. And then he said to me, Simone, you know your mother as well as I know. If you cut yourself, I will deny everything, and you have to make it out with your mother.
So what did he do? He was in manufacturing?
No, he was... he didn't manufacture himself. He was a salesperson.
Right.
He was inheriting a factory for weaving, but his heart wasn't in there. He wanted to become an engineer, but coming out of the war, walking back from Russia to Germany, he wanted to build bridges, and bridges possibly a metaphor for, what he had experienced in that war.
What had he experienced?
He was a board navigator and came down over pressure in May or so, 1945, and then walked back to Germany. And I don't know exactly. He told me one story of it, uncannily, that after a while he realized that while he was still in Poland, that he was walking behind his brother maybe a month, because they both had a characteristic ear that stood out. And so he knew that his younger brother, was alive. And those are all sorts of things. So he wanted to build bridges that facilitate one side to the other, metaphorically and literally. The good problem to solve, how to make a bridge safe and stable and maybe elegant.
Can we talk a bit about your childhood? Because you've described yourself in various places as an excellent dyslexic. Can we talk about your dyslexia and the pros and cons of that, and how that affected your school life, and also, presumably your relationship with what you do now?
Yeah. I possibly knew much earlier on than my family or anyone else that I was dyslexic.
Was it something that was talked about in those days, out of interest?
No, I think the first couple of years no one really had a comprehension. I just wondered how come that when in the autumn in year 2 we were asked to draw trees, autumn trees. We're just coming back from the summer holidays, and they all drew rectangular with straight things and some leaves. And when I looked out, it doesn't look like a tree, organic. And then they look at a piece of writing and they could make sound out of it, which I couldn't, unless I remembered it by heart. So that was the first time when I thought, they work different than I do. But then they also couldn't do other practical things as well as I could. But I couldn't do, the writing. Terrible.
So did that lead to bullying?
Yeah.
Where you
teasing,
yeah.
To the point of bullying, to the point of being declared dumb.
By teachers or by your fellow pupils? Or
Both.
Right.
Both, yeah. The teachers didn't have an idea. And it was so new and so different. And not every dyslexic is the same. And not every dyslexic is like I am. On a bad day, I draw my name wrong. Most days, I draw it nicely. I can read, but I have to switch on. And then I read it out phonetically. So it's an effort. And it's not something I want to do all the time.
Well, it's interesting because in a curious kind of way, we live in quite a literary age, I would suggest now, more so maybe than back then, because it's constant messages and texts, email. How does that... Is it more difficult now than it used to be?
I always thought, when computers come on, no one needs to read because they do it all for yourself. And yes, my computer reads every email out for me, and I speak quite a few, not everything I can write into it via talk. But, an SMS, my telephone in particular, doesn't do that. Talk to me. And yes, a lot is about reading. And I opt in, and I consciously also opt out of a lot of these things. But it makes you also read the world in a different way. So the sense of colour, and I like grey. I say to people, I read grey like other people read the newspaper. There's that amount of blue or ochre or red or any other colour than black in there. And a lot of other things, the observation and the mimicry and copying and all that is part of dyslexia. And also the thinking. And as most dyslexic will agree with me, we possibly think slightly different than conventional people or people who read well.
Because there are a tremendous number, an unusual proportion of creatives, makers, artists, architects, designers are diagnosed dyslexic. Did it force you? You had the interest anyway, obviously, getting toolboxes at the age of 5.5 or whatever it was. But did it force you to look at different avenues? Did it force you to look at materials, I wonder? I
don't know as much as looking than following a path where you're good at, you pursue it, What feels good surely is good for yourself. And so for me, it was never really a question, I go deliberately there. I avoided German, and I'm also not good at maths and things like that. But I like a good problem, and I like to get my head around it and find solutions. And And by now I can appreciate how I find solutions and that they are not in the conventional theoretical point. They always have a point of practical application, either through working and thinking it out by making, or through drawing or any other material sense.
At school, you experimented with a number of materials, I remember reading. What was it particularly about metal that appealed?
It goes back earlier that in my father's company I was introduced to one of the workers, and he showed me in his spare breaks how to make out of welding rod and a bit of tin, how to make a flower or a couple of other toys. And from there on, I liked the smell. I liked, you can work it hot. I could see all that. I didn't do all of that, but I saw a lot of that. You can work it hot and cold, and it didn't break, and not like wood. My father worked a bit in wood in a hobby way. It has completely different properties. And there was something really fantastic about it, that unlike China, when it shatters or whatever, you can mend it. It doesn't shatter like this, but you can mend it, you can do with it. And then when you work with other materials that are not ferric, you can stretch it, you can roll it out, you can do a lot of things. So when I went to this boarding school, it was clear that the government wanted to put me into a mental handicap school. And
really?
My parent, yeah.
Wow.
Because I'm an excellent dyslexic.
Yeah, very excellent. Good Lord.
Yes.
That's quite shocking.
Yeah, and my mum said, my daughter has no material for that. Thanks God for that. And so for years, they worked hard that they could sustain me in that boarding school, and it made a real difference.
Was this specifically for people with dyslexia, or
not specifically? It was co-educational, and it really wanted to bring out, to not only educate the head, also the hands and the heart. So they always had apprenticeships, and they always had social interaction in the school and with the community.
because you did a blacksmith's apprenticeship at the age of 13, right? This was part of the school curriculum?
Yeah,
Or
dual education as well.
Right.
So as part of the school education system, you went to school and you did your apprenticeship, but you had to do it a bit longer, not the 3 years or sometimes 2.5 years. So I started at just at the end of 13 and finished with 19.
Right.
And I did my technical abitur, and that was just fantastic.
And it was always metal?
It was always metal. We did, in that year before, we did go a term through wood, a term through ceramic, metal, and I think there was maybe electronic. Electronic didn't work at all. That was boring. But it was really clear that I loved that metal, what it could do. That really... You know when you taste something and it just hits you and you just know, God, why didn't I not have this before? And it was like that. I just loved every day in there. And I still do. There are still surprises and moments that I really enjoy working with metal.
And so what were you making at that point?
In an apprenticeship, it was an educational, so we didn't go out on site, and because we were also too young. But we really had to learn the filing, the cutting, later on some lace work, the welding, the forging, and to forge out, we did repairs for the farmers, as I said. The school had connection with the farmers around. And so we did sort of work for others, but not on a commercial sense. And we just learned how to use all these machines and all these things, how to sharpen a drill, and how to sharpen a 1 millimeter drill and a 10 millimeter drill. You have a bunch as big as a hand could hold, any sizes in between, and they were all blunt, and you had until the afternoon to finish it. The advantage is today my eyesight is failing. I know how to do it. It's in my right arm. It knows this. So it's in the conventional sense, as Richard Sennett says, it takes 10,000 hours. And if you equate that to an apprenticeship, that comes out 3 years working 5 days a week, 8 to whatever hours. And that makes 10,000 hours.
And did you have a sense where you're going to take this? What you're ultimately going to do?
Really early on, before I went to the boarding school, I asked my parents what it takes to be a goldsmith. Don't ask me why goldsmith. And I did say I don't mean the jewellers on the high street. I can't personally remember where, but my father knew someone. And at that time, he was, in the sense as we now understand it, a metal worker. He did doors for churches. These were the 60s, 70s. And he did jewellery. So I went to the workshop and had a really good look around and absolutely knew this is exactly what I wanted to do. The span of, big stuff and small stuff and the shiny material and the rough material, and all those, the whole diametrics of metal. It comes in so many different ways and so many different qualities. All that really appealed to me. And the sense of the workshop, the benches and the tools and fire and all that. It's like Middle Ages, You go anywhere into a village and people were having a fireplace and forging out things, and you hear the tinkering of other hammers and stuff. It's just fantastic sound as well.
But the path took you to Düsseldorf University. Why there?
Düsseldorf, unlike the others, did equally jewellery and metalwork. Other schools were more towards jewellery or more towards silversmithing. And Düsseldorf had more of stand in between. It was called product design, jewellery as a product. Interesting thought. So we could do jewellery and metal. We could bring in design as a sense of the theory of design, but also the experimental face of that.
But jewellery, you had a sense that was important? You wanted to study jewellery particularly at that point? How did that work?
After the apprenticeship, yes, I thought jewellery is what I wanted to do. And I did possibly the best part of Düsseldorf jewellery. And I worked with a jeweller and I learned a lot of the techniques and things like that. But towards the end, I really got the zest for bigger things. And so I made for my exam some vessels and container that hold water and how it just slosh in metal. You can feel it on the outside where the water is. And after that, I just knew that jewellery is something, but it's not the real sort of the spice that I'm looking for.
So the spice you were looking for was spoons?
The spice I'm looking for is not only in one object with a function like a spoon. It's more what I like to call the good problem. So with jewellery, everything has to go either through a hole or around something round. It's the neck, the finger ring, or other places. Or yeah?
Yes, I'm with you.
Okay. And with metal or silversmithing, but I'm really interested in metal because I'm not only hooked up on silver. There is a problem that could be a decorative, that could be a functional problem, that could be a material problem. And there are possibly others, including philosophy or theory, that you can really debate through the making. And if you make 1 or 2 or 3 pieces in that vein, and yes, you spoke about the spoons, not one spoon is the same, but they are in a row of spoons I have made, and they have my signature without spelling it out. But what is a spoon? Is it foremost a thing you put into your mouth and penetrating? Or is it something that is a function to take liquid from here to there, i.e. from the table into the mouth? Or is it a cup that is too small and with a too big handle? Where does it come from? Well, don't know. But a spoon is something that is so old and much older than that, and it possibly comes from cupping your hand, and then you have an arm on there, and that makes the sign of a spoon.
I mean, you've talked about it, and I think rather poetically and rather beautifully as being a metaphor for life. And we start our life using a spoon, and
it's
often,
the first
let's
tool.
face it, we finish it, using a spoon.
With some dignity,
Mushing up
if
food
we have,
and everything else. Yeah.
And also it becomes a tool. As a child, you throw things around and you find how it propels stuff much faster than your parents could catch it. And later on you use it to lever something open, to open a jar, or whatever else, And that's the sign of a tool, and that makes a difference for us as humans, that we can appropriate a simple thing with a handle and a luffle, and it becomes a different tool.
I mean, when you went to the Royal College, after Düsseldorf in London. Well, I guess, first instance, why the Royal College? And was it difficult to leave Germany and come to London?
The Royal College, I did an exchange. I always wanted to go abroad, and I knew quite clearly I didn't want to go to America. I really liked this country. And I did an exchange to Farnham, and that reaffirmed and confirmed that I want to come here. And I saw the Royal College degree show. And so I set my eye on that. And at that time in Europe, there were very few universities or colleges that did an MA, and the Royal College was one of them. And leaving Germany, that moment, yes, when I went on the train and then on the plane, that was difficult. But when I was here, the excitement of that place and the grandeur and, be around Hyde Park, the Albert Hall and all that, and on the side where the workshop was, we could oversee that. You felt right in the middle of London.
And when at the Royal College, when did your work, as we know it now, begin to take shape? Was that when you arrived at the Royal College? Was it after the Royal College?
The Royal College at that time was just turned around from 3 years to 2 years, which I really enjoyed. And so the first year we had projects, and in the second year we were much more left to our own devices. And that's really when I started to map out a series of objects that I wanted to understand. So one was a series of bowls where I had two elements to make them stable. And what is the theory behind it? And yes, you need either a line and a point or 3 points, and then you can support things. What is it about holding liquid, containing liquid, carrying it around, a hip flask, or a teapot? How do you pour rather than chucking out? And when does the last drop of water goes back into the teapot or into the cup? You can see these problems when it drips and it goes and spills everywhere. And that were really exciting investigations. How do you make a spout that does that? And how do you make then a pot that communicates to the spout?
So were you making functional objects or art at that stage? And what do you make now?
I want to opt out of that because I think making is consuming, it's all-consuming, to the point that it has a smell, it has a taste on the tip of my tongue. When I get a shape, the first moment I have it somewhere with a taste and with a name I can't articulate it. And as it then manifests itself in reality through my hands, then yeah, it's that name and it's that taste. And I understand that. But the intention is not so clear that I know that picture at the outset. And it's an unrevealing, not like a sculptor who carves into a stone and reveals the picture, because I don't do that in that way, but it has these sort of aspects. So if you want to say it's art or design, I think these days there's a notion of design in the work and there's a notion of art in the work. But there's a huge amount of making, crafting, if you so like. And those 3 points, I oscillate between all 3 of them.
Can we talk about process? And how do you draw? How do you come up with the forms that you do?
I'm at the moment with a really big commission for National Museum of Scotland, and it's always at the beginning a fist in my mouth and what do I do? And most of the time I don't go for a pencil, I go for a pair of scissors. And I cut out and I take some gum paper and stick it together. And then I go and draw. I need to see the shape, and I can translate that from flat into 3D better than from my head onto 2D. So I more often go and make models. And then I understood, because I make the models, I have it in my hands. I don't need to look at the model when I do the drawings. And then the drawings are not drawing the model, they are an investigation into otherness, into options, into possibilities, into articulations. And I get hooked on different things, and sometimes I jump and do other things. So it's more a listing of variables.
Because, for example, when you made that piece that comprised 108 spoons, presumably you didn't make 108 models, or did you?
No. Okay, before I made those spoons, I had made possibly more than 100 beforehand. And as I said beforehand, it's this embodied understanding. When I've made the model, my hands have something, my body understands something and recognize certain shapes. And then it's a translation into other movements or experience. And with spoons, I possibly have the same notion that I have an understanding what it is, the sign of a spoon. And then to superimpose over that a layer of materiality. And not always conventional, because we recognize an incomplete spoon quite quickly as a spoon. And how incomplete can that, or how exaggerated can this handle be, or this container element be? And when do we articulate it as other than a spoon? And those points, those cut-off points are interesting. And when you then put them together and see a row of spoons that I've made, then a debate comes to the fore, because they are not only silver, they are found materials and they are crafted materials, and there's a bit of gold in there, and there's a bit of silver and other precious stuff, and totally non-precious stuff. And the ultimate decision is for the onlooker whether they want to put that into the mouth. And with that comes a row of other thoughts. How would it feel? And that is really what I want to provoke. What happened if, and how does it feel?
Hence why many of your pieces are series of objects, I guess.
Yeah, because it's really difficult to do that in one. You don't have the field of testing and the subtlety of change. And that is really exciting. The small changes. A lot of my silver spoons are not forged out in one. They are made out of two. But that point of juncture If I had taken, I would have loved to have done that earlier on. Just the photograph of that section, of all those changes. And I'm sure there won't be two that are utterly the same, but so many that work within a margin, but yet are completely different. And that bit, that scene, is what I said before, is that I read rather than the letters on the paper.
Can we change tack for a moment? You've been teaching at the CAS for 3 decades, we were talking about earlier. 3 decades. What's the importance of education to your practice? Why do you do it?
First of all, I want to communicate this joy when you get this, whatever it is, when you get that, that your first soldering, your first perfect filing, your first experience of a new material, the first sort of thing that you can put on your clothes and wear it. That's fantastic. And it's so rare these days because most of the time people press buttons and screen changes and whatever else. But there you go through all that and it hasn't changed a lot in 2,000 years. And it sustains itself in a way, I don't know how long in the future, but it does that. And once you've made something to a certain level, it's treasured. And it's not necessarily treasured for the material value. And that, I think, is really interesting to communicate and talk to students, particularly now about that. That it is not given that they have this understanding, they possibly appreciate a nice iPhone, but then come into the workshop and see all this other stuff, different metals, different tools. And when you tell them in the CAS they have tools that are 100 years old, the CAS exists for 60 years, but some of the tools are much older. That's my grandmother was born 100 years ago. That's really long.
We've obviously had loads of changes in technology since you started teaching, and I wonder if that has affected the kind of student you have nowadays.
Definitely, they are all millennials now, and they don't know the time when we only had a telephone, and once you leave the house, you can't just say, I'll be late. And it has good sides to it, that you can use rapid prototyping and you can make certain things. But it's a little bit, when I was at school and we had our first calculator, you remember the green ones?
I'm not sure I do, Simone.
See, that much older. But
yeah, that's exactly the point I was trying to make.
Yep. They had these green figures, and boy, that was all they were able to do, and you could figure out Zenus, whatever Zenus is. And those were really analog kind of things. And now they can make digital things. They can have an idea, and if they can draw it. But you still need, in order to know how to do digital stuff or to calculate something, you need to know how to add up. And this adding up, in my discipline, is how to construct something with your hands. And the simplest adding up is a lump of clay and shape it. And if it gets close to what you think, fine. And then you can debate it also through drawings. And that's the first thing. And we don't have something that plugs into your head and you can present an image. That is still the challenge. And it's the challenge with a lot of things. If you write a piece of text, you need to go through the same process. You have the warp and the weft in order to hold the text together. The text out of words and contents and structures like sentence and paragraphs, beginnings and ends. And with metal, it's the same. You have a beginning and an end, and you need to fill the middle bit so that you don't lose the reader.
Do you have a relationship with technology? I don't see, looking around, any 3D printers in this room.
No. It would be too damp. No. There, the dyslexic comes in. I know what they can do and the graphics and the technical drawings and all that, but boy, there's so much to read. And by the time when I did the courses, I found where that word was. The others were 3 pages further on. It doesn't quite work for me. And I've worked with PhD students and have modeled for them. And one in particular said, in an afternoon with you, I had more real-life models, 3, than I had in 3 weeks on the computer. So, I happen to have this ability to think laterally. And the other bit, I leave those who are not dyslexic or have a different talent.
I mean, more recently, in fact, currently, you're doing a project with archaeologists, which you've talked about a little bit, alluded to at least, with National Museum Scotland. What are you doing, and what are the results of this likely to be?
The brief is fixed, but the research is not. I work with the National Museum of Scotland in Edinburgh, and it's sponsored by Glenmorangie.
The whiskey brand?
Yes.
Okay.
So the research is that I have 12 months. In the middle, I need to present 2 proposals. And so at the moment, I get my head around the picks and medieval silver and what they did and how did silver get into Scotland and all sorts of theoretical stuff about age and time and the technology of a museum, how it conserves and preserves, and conservation has a theory.
And when will we see the results of this?
At the end of this year, December.
Right, okay.
So I'm right now in the phase where I have made models and I have done some drawings and I'm starting to get a measure. But it's really early days, so it's really rough models. And but I documented everything, and I'm pretty sure the museum will put it out as a timeline. So far, I have made possibly 100 and something photographs.
Wow. Well, we will look out for that. Simone ten Hompel, our time is up. Thank you very, very much.
That was fantastic. Thank you for coming to the workshop.
And to learn more about Simone's work, go to tenhompel.com. There are images of the interviews as well as little films and other things on my Instagram page, Grant on Design. If you've enjoyed listening and want to see this podcast flourish, then please rate and review on Apple Podcasts and go to my Patreon page and make a pledge. You can find that at patreon.com/Material Matters. You'll be helping to take the message of the importance of materials, skill, craft and design to a whole new audience. And finally, if you want to sponsor an episode or indeed an entire series, do drop me a line on gdgibson@btinternet.com. Thanks very much for listening.